Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan, read the paper, Sunday, June 2nd, 2019. We are back from Greenville, South Carolina.
Yes, we're back home.
So before, we did the podcast last week before the big event of our weekend, the wedding of Elena and Brendan. And it was a great wedding. It was lovely. It was beautiful. It was within walking distance. So that was nice.
Yeah, because it was 95 degrees. Yes, it was within walking distance. It was very nice. It was very pleasant. Greenville's very impressive. The wedding was very nice. The band was good. You were able to keep up with me on the dance floor, which is always good. And
we got everybody into the act. Even my mother was out there on the rollator, dancing away as best one can in a rollator.
Right.
Let's
face it, there was an open bar. It was something. It was spirited.
Yes. So kudos to Elena and Brendan for pulling that off.
Yes.
And kudos to Bryce and for paying for it.
Well,
with others, I guess.
We don't know who paid for it.
We don't know who.
For all we know, nobody paid for it, and there's a legal issue there.
Okay. And then we had part of another day in Greenville. We were there long enough to actually go to the Maple Street Biscuit Company.
Oh, yeah.
And we had some excellent biscuits.
Yeah, so that's what, I should say Granger's with us, and he's going to jump in on the basketball later, unless he has something to say even before that, but he missed out on this. So this was a big biscuit place, which we found out by accident. We were checking out. Tamsen, who chats up everybody, talks to the guy who has our car. Gee, where would you go for biscuits? He said,
No, I did not even say that.
What did you say?
I said, please bring up the car. We're going to run next door and grab some breakfast sandwiches.
Right.
I never mentioned biscuits.
Yeah. Well, somehow the way the conversation morphed was he was saying before you knew it, the food...
That's okay.
The food at the hotel where I work is okay, but the place that you want to get breakfast is
Maple Street Biscuit Company. It's just a couple blocks away.
Which it was correct. So the funny thing about that, we could go on forever about this place. Big line. Everyone's eager to get their biscuits and whatever. Huge place with open places to sit. And they have all these fantastic breakfast combinations. And the food was great. And the way they assign numbers, whatever, to pick up your order, as opposed to saying you're number 11, you give them the school from which you graduated and the year you graduated. And in that crowd, it was often the high school. So people were saying like Franklin High, 2014.
No, it was mostly Clemson.
There was a lot of Clemson.
And whatever.
So we came in with, I came in with Princeton 75. Now, Princeton didn't throw them so much, but they couldn't really deal with 75. They used 79, I think, on the theory that no one who was so old that they graduated in 1975 would be able to get their own biscuits. So
what you're saying is you were flattered that they thought you were in the class of 79.
Something like that. Flattered but not surprised. But we enjoyed the biscuits a great deal. So we had a great time.
Yeah. So, that's what you go to Greenville for, is biscuits.
That's right.
Among other things.
Right.
So we were not disappointed.
So we're in a traveling mode. So we're going to start with giving you a little traveling insight based on what people are writing about in the newspaper. Ms. Granger, on top of the travel situation.
Yeah. So in the travel section of the New York Times, nice story about skipping the chateau at Versailles by Susan Dominus, who was in France with her 12-year-old son. She goes on the Versailles website, and it has a travel alert. And it's not that there's a bomb threat or anything. It's that it's going to be super crowded. And I think it was the website itself recommends maybe you just want to rent a bike and tool around the beautiful grounds. And so, in fact, that's what the author and her son do. There are various gates to the grounds, and you can rent bicycles. And they did, and they just tooled around. They had a great time, and I guess they felt they didn't miss much. So for the rest of their visit in France, they end up renting bikes a lot.
Yeah.
And making bike tours, which, yes, we've always believed that. You actually end up seeing more often on a bike ride than on a tour of a historic site.
You're better off on the bike than stuck in a museum, is what I always say. But,
right.
Yes.
But actually, to be honest, on one of our bike tours, another couple told us about a great bike tour they did
in Versailles.
Around Versailles.
Yeah.
And it was an organized tour. And they had a nice picnic lunch or something, and they got a private tour.
Well, that's
private
extra.
Tour is often better because they might speak English.
Yeah.
And you know, they might be more responsive to what you're actually interested in.
I bet you pay for that though. I mean,
you do pay for that.
Yeah.
But they said it was a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
So if I go back to Versailles again, I might do something like that.
All right, I'm warned. I'm forewarned. They're also
and back to the bicycle theme.
Yeah.
The 36 hours in
X City,
X,
which the Times does on a regular basis.
Right, it's a regular feature.
The city was
Bend, Oregon,
where we've been. And you know, it's funny. Before we even started, I thought everyone knew about Bend, and I mentioned Bend once in a while to my colleagues at work. And I almost get blank stares all the time, which surprised me.
I think it's a certain demographic.
Is that it?
Which New York lawyers may not regularly fall into.
I guess. I mean,
because
to me,
it's a really outdoorsy place.
Because if you're on a bike trip anywhere and someone says Bend, everyone knows what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, they...
I should say it's in Oregon.
The article mentions
Yeah.
that Bend is so popular that the locals wear a bumper sticker that says, "Bend sucks. Don't move here."
Right. Which is because they don't want you, but it doesn't suck.
Prices are going up. Rentals are going up.
It's a beautiful place.
Although on the bike tour we went on, we were chatting up one of the guides, and he was about to invest in a property in Bend
for B&B,
so he could rent it out.
Yeah. So let me just say before we go on with that there's a reason that these guys are bike guides. They're not, necessarily the financial wizards. I mean, but that's fine. But Bend is beautiful, and the Times confirms that. And not only Bend, but in the neighboring town, Sisters, which we spent a fair bit of time in on this bike trip.
Yeah. Actually, they mention a place that we stayed on the bike trip called Five Pine.
That's in Sisters.
And it had, in Sisters, Oregon, which is right next to Bend. And they had wonderful craftsman-style cottages. Right. Ours had...
it's all stickly furniture.
A shower that came out of the ceiling.
Yeah, so here's the deal. Let me just tell you, if I can set the scene quickly. Yes, so we go to this place. It's like the last or second last day of the bike ride. It is like right off the highway. And there are these little cabins. It doesn't make any sense. It's totally incongruous. But the main point is, we're done physically. We can barely walk to the cabins. We've had it. Long, hot day in the sun.
Turns out Oregon has hills.
Yeah, right. So after 5 days of this, we sort of crawl to the cabin. And we're sitting there, and Tamsen says to me, "Oh, look at that! They have this stickly furniture right by the fireplace." And I say to Tamsen, "If I could only walk to the fireplace, that would be great." And I don't think we ever got there. I mean, we were dead. And we almost had a heart attack when the bath water came from the ceiling.
Yes,
honestly.
we weren't anticipating that.
Everyone was. You heard
Turned
shouts.
on the faucet,
Everyone.
And then the water comes from the ceiling.
It was like a fantasy thing. So we'll come back there without going 100 miles.
But that was a lovely place. I mean, maybe it sounds a little...
No, you could go. And it's not even expensive.
Right, compared to New York, it was not expensive at all. Yeah. So that was good. And also in Bend, we went to the Deschutes Brewery,
right, which
was fun, and pretty funny tour of the brewery itself. And we stayed in an eco chic hotel, called the Oxford, I think.
All right,
and that was très cool. Five Pine was
right. The Deschutes Brewery was nice. It's the nitro stout that you get at the Deschutes Brewery.
One more thing about the Five Pine.
Yeah.
The cabins were set in just random fields of wildflowers.
Yeah, really?
Yes.
I didn't notice. Okay, so I'm going to take your word for it. I could hardly see. All right, so we have Granger here for basketball. And Granger alerted me to something. Of course, we're watching the basketball final now between the Toronto Raptors and the Golden State Warriors. Everyone riding the horse that is the Golden State Warriors to probably, everyone says, another big victory. You heard here before that Golden State's guilty of bad karma, and therefore they're going to be challenged going forward. But in any event, they're playing Toronto, and they play the first game, and here's what happens. Number 1, Toronto wins, and number 2, the star of the game is, Granger?
Pascal Siakam.
Who no one's ever heard of. And when I mean no one, I mean me. So, Granger, explain to us who Pascal Siakam is and how improbable a story this is.
So Pascal Siakam is a young player for the Toronto Raptors. He's going to be the winner of the most improved player this year in the NBA. He's from Cameroon, where he's the youngest of a basketball-playing family. He has 3 older brothers, all play Division I ball, and he was supposed to be the priest of the family. Started studying at the age of 11 at religious school, and when he got to be about 15, he started rebelling to get himself kicked out of school, and eventually went on a lark to the basketball camp that his brothers go to, or his brothers had gone to and got recognized at. His brothers, upon hearing that he was going to the camp, said, "Are you kidding?" Because they think, "This is my little brother. He's terrible at basketball.
Right.
He's not that athletic, whatever, even though he's a tall guy." He gets recognized at the camp more for his effort than his skill, but he's a quick guy. He's long. He's tall. He's determined, and he gets an offer at an American high school eventually. He's there for a year. Goes to New Mexico State. Spends a couple of years there. He's freshman of the year in the conference the first year. Then after a year where he gets 20 points a game, goes to the NBA. Has some ups and downs in the NBA to start with. And now all of a sudden he's the second best player on a team with a 1-0 lead in the finals.
It's crazy. First of all, he's 25 years old. He's, as Granger mentioned, he's long. He's 6'9", 230 pounds. And in game 1, he scored 32 points. He was by far the most effective player on the court in the most important basketball series in the world. And that's one of the amazing things about the NBA. And I don't think you see this in any other sport. The storylines keep changing, and then you got a guy like this, and everybody's going like, who the heck is this guy? And meanwhile, I was watching some news reports in Toronto, which is a very multicultural city, and sure enough, they find the Cameroon neighborhood in Toronto. And guess what? They're excited. So they're in the backyard with these guys. They can't even interview these guys. Between the dancing and the music that goes on for 10 minutes, they're going, Pascal, Pascal, Pascal. They never met Pascal, but they're behind him.
So he didn't show up in the earlier against the Bucks and so on?
Well, he was there, but he's not a star.
No, I know.
He had a tough series against the Bucks. That's a good point. So in his first round, he did well. Second round, not as good. His third round, not as good. And then this game, he had 32 points and 14 of 17 shots, 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 3-pointers.
Yeah. So look, he clearly was the story and the difference in the game. Is that going to be every game? No, probably. I don't know. We'll see, but that's what you got to tune in to find out. So we're watching a basketball series that has gone on, and all you hear about are people like Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and Kevin Durant. And this name doesn't come up until 2 days ago. And he's from where? And he's 25. Just to give you an idea, he's making $1.5 million. That's a hefty salary, except the next guy up on the ladder in terms of salary, in terms of starting team at Toronto, makes $10 million. He's a nobody. But he's a nobody who's emerging. Not for long. Yeah, so it's an amazing story. The things turn like on a dime in the NBA, and maybe he'll continue.
It kind of reminds me of when Ginobili became famous during the playoffs years ago.
Maybe.
He's reserved that really.
Yeah, well, another guy from a foreign country. In his case, France. It's funny, they did the post-game news conference.
Nobody's from Argentina.
Oh, Argentina. My mistake.
It's
right.
like France.
But
different.
I think Tony Parker, his teammate. I was thinking of a specific guy. But here's why I was talking of France too. Because Siakam speaks 2 languages fluently, English and French, because he's Cameroonian. And they do the press conference. And at the end of the press conference, following the other game, he looks up at the crowd and goes, "No questions in French?" So there you go. All right. Thank you, Granger. So tune in tonight, NBA, and the rest of the series.
Yeah, we want to get Granger out of here because now we're going to talk about Burlesque.
Yes, it's going to go. Here's the scandalous part of the broadcast.
The broadcast. There's always something, I find. Well, of course, I continue to get the BBC History magazine.
Excellent.
It's a monthly
How'd
magazine.
you get that? Who got that for you?
I get it.
Your husband.
Oh, I thought it was Santa.
No.
Anyway, I get it a month after everybody else in BBC land reads it. But nonetheless, I'm delighted to have it. And there's all kinds of interesting stories in it this month, or well, April actually. I'm talking about the April edition, and the one I go to immediately is basically the history of the origins of burlesque theater.
Yeah.
Now, when we think of burlesque theater, we basically think of striptease. Right? Women dancing around wearing not much clothing.
Oh, you say so. Yes, go ahead.
It wasn't always that way.
Right.
Okay? When burlesque theater basically originates in England, in London, kind of mid-19th century, what it is, kind of an upper crust theater meant to lampoon things like Shakespeare and opera. Mm-hmm. And of course, girls in a chorus line with bare legs was important, all right? But so was this satirical view of whatever was the popular, opera at the time. And you really wouldn't get all the jokes, all the humor, I think all the puns, really, unless you were familiar with opera. So that's the funny thing about it. It wasn't just that women were coming out scantily clad, although they were, and many times there were trouser rolls meant to facilitate seeing women's legs. Because, of course, if you're in a long dress, you don't see legs, but if you're playing a man and you have like tights on with a doublet or whatever, you get quite a good view. So that's kind of fun. And a variety of people worked in burlesque, including your friend and mine, W.S. Gilbert, as in Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yeah.
He actually wrote a variety of burlesque pieces, including a version of Robert the Devil, None Done Son of a Gun, which is, I think, based on a Meyerbeer opera, actually. Well, anyway, I don't know enough about opera to get any enjoyment out of this, but anyway, that was a lot of fun. It starred a famous comic, Nellie Farron, who couldn't sing, couldn't act, but apparently was hilarious and had fantastic legs. So that must have been quite a riot. It was all very silly. All right. There was no plot to speak of. It's not like they were satires that really, stayed close to the original opera or Shakespeare play they were lampooning. It was just pure ridiculousness. But another interesting person that worked in this field was Lucia Elizabeth Vestris. And she starts out as an actress and opera singer and a great success in burlesque, but she ends up managing a theater and being quite the theatrical business person, again, in the 19th century. So it was a really fun article and, mentioned all these other, there was a spoof of La Traviata, there was a spoof of Lucrezia Borgia, etc. That's where burlesque comes from.
Well, there's a lot of burlesque comics. When burlesque gets to the U.S., all kinds of, even Phil Silvers we were talking about was a burlesque comic. I mean, there's all kinds of comical stuff in burlesque.
Yeah, but they were actually singing arias.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's different.
And the arias would be rewritten as you would do in like a camp play or a college.
That's a half step to Gilbert and Sullivan right there, really. I mean, that's
right.
Doggerel. But yeah.
Well, yeah. But, closer probably to SNL than anything else, that version of it. But it always was titillating. It always was meant to show girls with not much clothing on.
Right.
So, interesting combination. Gave the sort of upper middle class somewhere to enjoy themselves.
But
With a slight, still kind of a snobbery there. It wasn't quite the music hall crowd.
so no one saw people didn't see the
BBC
eye roll
history.
on it.
You
Yeah.
got to read it. You
All
got to
right.
read it.
Well,
I'm going to go on to read the rest of the magazine, which has things about, Henry VIII and all that. But how much fun to know about the history of burlesque.
All right. Yeah, I'm glad I got you that back. Me and Santa. So the concern in the hockey championships is that Boston's in the final against St. Louis. Boston's up 2-1, and people are down on Boston. They're unhappy with Boston wins too much. That's what's come up.
You mentioned that to me the other night, and so we immediately started rooting for St. Louis.
Immediately. Boston Red Sox, of course, won the World Series. The Boston Patriots, New England Patriots, won the football NFL championship. And
Hard to keep all these sports straight.
You can't.
Isn't
It is. So the
Round
Times
ball, pointy
Well,
ball.
the Times did research and decided when was the last time that you had a city that was held a title in 3 major sports at the same time. The definition is important because in 69, 70, New York actually did win all these, but you had the Jets and the Mets and the Knicks, but it didn't work out perfectly in terms of them holding the title at the same time. So it's a very clear New York Times fussy definition. And when did this happen before? And you're asking yourselves, you're pouring through Chicago. Who was it? Philadelphia? No. The answer is the 1935 Detroit teams. Detroit, 1935. And it's not as if they didn't notice in Detroit. Detroit did notice. Detroit in 1935 was in a bad way financially. Obviously, it's, car manufacturing, which was going great guns until 1929. But when 1929 hit and you had the stock market crash, car manufacturing was down, the economy was bad. But you had the sports teams in Detroit emerging. So you had the Detroit Tigers of baseball, the Detroit Lions of football, and the Detroit Red Wings of hockey all managed to win the championship and hold that championship at the same time. Of those 3 teams, the least important by far in 1935 was the NFL championship. No one cared very much about that. But it was true. They had that championship with the Lions. But the other 2 were a big deal. So much so that this did not escape Detroit, and they had a huge banquet in April 1936, as they described in the Times, limousines chauffeuring a parade of stars at the majestic Masonic Temple. They had stars from all 3 of those teams together to celebrate that Detroit was the site of these 3 championships. But they had something else that made Detroit even better than Boston. You know what that was?
What?
They had the best athlete in the world who was on none of those teams, and that was Joe Louis. Joe Louis was the heavyweight championship of the world, and he was from, guess where? Detroit. So take that, Boston. You're not going to have that. You might have the 3 championships, but what really set Detroit apart was Joe Louis. The heavyweight championship of the world was also from Detroit at that time, and that's a record that will never be equaled. So even if Boston Bruins wins, I think we're okay.
Well, this reminds me of Spike Lee.
Yes.
Because there's a story about him in the Metropolitan section where they tell about how various people spend their Sundays.
Yes.
Usually it's not a celebrity like Spike Lee.
Right.
But for whatever reason it was, there was a picture of him, I guess, in his office or something, and in the background is a poster for Joe Louis.
Is that right?
Yeah. And the other funny thing, there was a funny story about him and his wife buying a house in Manhattan. And it's Jasper John's old house.
Right.
And, but there was none of, he's the famous artist. I guess they were hoping there'd be like a little memento of his having been there. And Spike Lee says, no, not a paintbrush, not a drop of paint, but there was a door. A Rauschenberg door, he called it. And the realtor led them to believe that if they bought the house, they'd have a Rauschenberg.
Which is Robert Rauschenberg,
right,
and would have had a painting on the door.
Right, who had a relationship with Jasper Johns. And they buy the house, door is gone. Even the hinges are gone.
So meanwhile, they get bad enough they lose the Rauschenberg door. They have no door.
Well, they probably were able to come up with a door. And anyway, at the end of the article, it's basically telling how the person spends their Sunday.
Yeah.
And, and he's talking about maybe he watches in the evening a movie with his wife, and then she might go on to watch some kind of series she's interested. Him, not so much. But he does say if it's June, he's watching the NBA
All right, good.
championships.
All right, we'll have him
So
on
you and
sometime.
Spike Lee,
Yeah, Pascal Siakam, I'm sure he's all over it. Listen, Joe Louis, an iconic sports figure in the way cultural significance that's kind of unmatched, really, in the years since. But you had something about Donny Hathaway.
Donny Hathaway. Okay, so I think I've mentioned before that one of my all-time favorite albums, and really the soundtrack, I think, of I guess it was my freshman year at Princeton, was the Donny Hathaway Roberta Flack album. And so there is currently a production about Donny Hathaway's life that is making the rounds. I guess it's called Twisted Melodies.
Mm-hmm.
And right now it's at
It's at
the
the Apollo
Theater.
Yeah, in Harlem.
It's been a variety of places, in Chicago, in Baltimore, and it really is starring Kelvin Roston Jr. as Donny Hathaway, and it's telling the story of his life because it was really a very poignant story. He grows up a musical prodigy, and he actually attends Howard University, majoring in classical music. He then goes on to produce and perform in a variety of groups, situations, etc. And yet, at a certain point, he seems to become kind of disoriented and paranoid, and is diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. And by 1979, he just before a profile about him appears in Ebony magazine, he's discovered dead on the sidewalk, apparent suicide. So it's
Well, I mean, look, he also I read that he was a drug addict, but I think that contributes to all this. I mean, it's all part of the same story. And he died, I think it was in his late 20s when he died, at most his early 30s, a really young age. So we're looking forward to possibly seeing that. I know someone who's seeing it this weekend. We'll get a report on that. But an amazing artist, and that's an amazing album. And he's kind of a unique talent. I mean, and it's funny. It's not like he's a household name, like everybody knows him. So I recall sitting around a restaurant, just on a bunch of people we just met, but they're working on a case together, and the restaurant's playing R&B stuff, and people are going, "Oh, I remember that song. That's the Temptations, or that's the Four Tops, or that's the Spinners," and they play a song no one can mention, no one can identify. And I say, "Oh, that's Donny Hathaway," and one or two people have heard of him. But an amazing guy. We'll play something later from Donny Hathaway.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing that's interesting about then the article in the New York Times mentions that this performance tries to address sort of the idea of this combination of music and madness.
Yeah,
and
that's pretty challenging.
It's kind of a cliche that if you suffer from mental illness, it actually gives birth to even greater arts. It's not necessarily that. Maybe it's just a fact of someone's life, but it's something you shouldn't ignore. That there's no need to ignore or pedal it or romanticize.
Could have been manic creative energy too. You hear about that sometimes. Well, maybe we'll see it. It's going to be there for another month. It's at the Apollo, right? That's what I recall.
Right. And then I think it's actually going down to Washington, D.C.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Okay. Probably Arena or someplace like that.
No. Washington Mosaic Theater Company.
Okay. All right. So we just have a couple of obituaries. The first is Curtis Blake, who founded Friendly's.
Yes, actually. Our family has depended greatly on Friendlies. It used to be the tradition for the kids and me to go out for dinner on a Friday night. And many of those Friday nights were spent in a Friendlies.
See, that's the difference.
Getting the clown sundae for dessert if one, in fact, had finished one's grilled cheese sandwich and French fries completely. Not a insurmountable task by any means. And also, I think the kids will tell you, I think Sadie and Granger will tell you that I broke the news to them of an impending sibling on the way.
Oh, really?
At Friendlies one Friday
What I remember
night.
is the story you told me, and the kids have even told me, when you told them we were going to Disney World. Was that at Friendly's or was that someplace else?
No, I thought the Friendly story was about, we're having a baby.
One of the things, I think you told them about you were at dinner with them. We're
so
going to Disney World, and I think they broke into tears of joy. It's the way.
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Many important family announcements happened at Friendlies. Of course, when I first heard of Friendlies, it was in New England, and it starts out in New England.
Right, in
Curtis
Springfield.
Blake and his older brother had nothing to do one summer. They couldn't find a summer job, so their mom convinces them to start an ice cream business.
Really?
So they make their own ice cream. They get a $547 loan from their parents. They buy a few tables and chairs for $8, and they're charging a nickel.
A nickel.
For 2
That was the
scoops.
key. The Times headline, I know you're reading from the Journal, the Times headline said they started with nickel ice cream. And at a time that they didn't have much money, but as they put it, neither did anybody else.
And so on their first day of business, they actually ring up $27 on the cash register.
That's a lot of sales at a nickel.
So, it's not like they make $1 zillion in this little startup.
I'm doing the math here. Keep talking.
For a long time,
Right.
they're just, their take-home pay, the brothers, is like $4.
That's 627 sales or something like that. That's a lot of work for $27.
Yeah. I've been in those situations.
Yeah.
And the Wall Street Journal notes that it helped that they lived with their parents and had few expenses. But eventually things get rolling. In fact, I guess it's in, 2006 that they sell the business?
Yeah, something like that.
They sell it in 1979 for $164 million.
Right.
Okay. And they actually, by 2006, there are 500 Friendlies all over the country. And, Curtis actually keeps on going.
He likes the ice cream.
Yeah,
he likes the ice cream, right?
Yeah. And so they flip a coin at a certain point early on to decide who will become the CEO. Curtis wins, but it's really his older brother who's more business-minded.
Right.
And Curtis is the friendly guy. And eventually he has a falling out with his brother and so forth, but they get back together. He and his brother also had another common interest, and that was classic cars.
Is that right?
Yeah. So here's a cool thing. Curtis bought his first car when he was 11. He bought a Model T for $2.50.
Oh, God.
So he goes on from there. He continued to go to Friendlies, and his favorite flavor was forbidden chocolate.
Right, of course. The quote here they have in the Times from Blake. Says, my mom used to say if Prez, that's the brother, owned the business alone, he wouldn't have any employees. But if I owned the business alone, I would give it all away to the employees. Which pretty much is how they split it up. One
takes a
had
village.
the business,
they
and,
had
and
complementary
one
talents.
was it? Oh, that's right. And there was so much work that the one was awake half the day, the other wasn't, and they were working all the time. But that's how you start.
That's like a perfect partnership. You don't always get that.
Yeah. Nickel ice cream. Think about that.
Those were the days.
Yes.
It was a big deal. That back in the days in the early 70s, and I would go up to New England to visit Nancy Ferguson, and we could go to Friendlies.
Listen, when I was growing up,
exotic.
And then, even years before,
15 years
Friendlies
later,
was like a mythical place.
Yeah.
My mother, we never went to Friendlies. My mother said, there's a place on a hill called Friendlies. Maybe one day we'll go. It was like that kind of thing. So who knows?
Well, your mother has spent time in New England.
That's right. And Leon Redbone died. Now Leon Redbone, as they say in the Times, idiosyncratic throwback singer who piqued Bob Dylan's interest. Well, that's interesting. We know.
Well, I noticed the obit because the first line is about he passed away in New Hope, Pennsylvania.
Right, Bucks County, as the Times puts it. He was in New Hope, 69 years old. So who was Leon Redbone? Is a hard guy to categorize, but you've probably seen him on an advertisement or on an old SNL show or something.
Or at least heard him.
Yeah,
as
possibly.
recently as the Elf movie.
Well, that's not so recent, unfortunately. But he played
But
Delta
it's a
Blues.
classic, so people hear it all the time. The version of Baby It's Cold Outside was sung by him and Zooey Deschanel.
Yeah, okay. So he showed up, he had a Panama hat all the time, or often he had dark sunglasses, he had a brushed mustache, and he sang in a very deep, gravelly voice and a very old-timey sound. This is kind of hard to replicate. I certainly couldn't replicate it. But he was affecting a particular type of music. As they say in one of the reviews they quote here, they said Redbone plays the role of a grinning, almost catatonic folkie. So,
right. I mean, I think in that obit they describe him as a musician, but also performance artist.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And so, but he was a great mystery. He wouldn't give any information about himself because he was creating this persona. And it turns out that, unlikely as it is, he was born in Cyprus.
Right.
In 1940.
Armenian descent.
Right. His name wasn't Leon Redbone, actually. His name originally was Dikran Gobalian. But he would not give any details of his life. And one of the funny things is, as I mentioned Dylan a moment ago, there's an interview with Dylan in which he says, Leon interests me. I've heard he's anywhere from 25 to 60. He's 60 years old. He says, I've been this close, holding his hands about a foot apart, and I can't tell which it is. So, and it's sort of a gentle soul. They have a quote that closes the obit with Redbone's talking. He says, well, I'm creating a mood. You can create a mood anywhere you want, with colors, with noise, yelling, and screaming. I myself prefer serenity, calm, peace, and quiet. There you go. A certain persona, a certain kind of music.
Unique talent.
Yeah. So in any event, we thought we would close with a song from the album that Tamsen mentioned a moment ago. From the album with Donny Hathaway with Roberta Flack. And the song, on the song, Donny Hathaway sings, Roberta Flack's playing piano. And it's called For All We Know. And, you have to decide if you're in the right mood. It is an astounding, in my mind, song. And a beautiful, gripping song. And we'll just play it for you. You can be your own judge.
I agree. All right, this is Tamsen Granger.
And Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan Read the Paper, we hope to see you again next week. And BT Dub, you can hear us on Spotify. You can hear us on YouTube. And, get us on Apple as well. So there are many possibilities.
Thanks.
Adios.
Adios.
For all we know, we may never meet again. Before you go, make this moment sweet again. We won't say good night until the last minute. I'll hold out my hand, and my heart